The manager harshly questioned Maria's abilities, as if her achievements meant nothing. But he had no idea that very soon this black woman would become his CEO. She didn't just take on the challenge, she transformed the company, proving that fighting bias starts at the top. What happened next stunned everyone who thought they'd seen it all. But let's start from the beginning. Maria, a confident black woman with deep knowledge and experience in business, decides to attend an interview at a renowned company where she's been invited to apply for a senior position. She is well prepared and determined, knowing her skills and qualifications meet the role's requirements. Entering the office, she notices a few wary glances from employees who look at her with open curiosity. The atmosphere already feels tense, but Maria remains calm, awaiting her meeting with management. She is greeted by Richard, a white man in his 40s, a mid-level manager responsible for hiring. The moment he sees Maria, his expression changes. A shadow of irritation and arrogance crosses his face. His eyes reveal distrust, and his face hardens, instantly putting Maria on guard. Richard begins the interview in a cold tone, ignoring her outstretched hand and diving straight into business questions. He openly disregards her impressive resume, which lists her successes and numerous achievements. Instead of asking about her experience, he repeatedly remarks sarcastically that the company is looking for people who really understand the nuances of the job. His questions become increasingly disparaging, filled with doubts about her abilities and subtle insinuations about her lack of experience. Maria answers each question with restraint, maintaining professionalism. However, seeing her composure, Richard shifts to outright insults, suggesting that she would have a hard time adjusting and would likely struggle with such a responsibility. Then he directly states that positions like this typically require people with strong connections, implying that the level is too high for her. His voice is filled with contempt, making it clear he doesn't see her as a serious candidate. As the interview wraps up, Richard, without waiting for Maria to stand, abruptly gets up and motions toward the door, indicating the meeting is over. Maria stands, doing her best to hide how his behavior affected her. She leaves with dignity, determined not to let him see the impact of his words. A few days after the humiliating interview, Maria receives an unexpected email in her personal inbox. The message is from the company's president himself, an older, respected businessman named Donald Hughes. In the email, he thanks her for her interest in the company, expresses confidence in her talent, and formally invites her to take on the position of CEO. Hughes mentions that he was impressed by her experience and vision, emphasizing that her appointment would be a vital step in the company's growth, as she could bring a fresh perspective and much-needed change to the corporate structure. Stunned by this turn of events, Maria rereads the email several times. She feels a mix of disbelief, then joy, and finally, a realization that her new position will give her the chance to transform the company and demonstrate true professionalism. Remembering Richard's condescending attitude, Maria decides to keep her appointment under wraps for now, planning to investigate the company's internal issues and gain a deeper understanding of what she's up against. The very next day, Maria arrives at the office, where she receives her ID badge and a brief tour of the departments. As she meets with employees, she notices that many appear nervous, and she realizes that as a black woman in a leadership position, she is an uncommon sight here. Many employees seem shy about interacting with her, avoiding eye contact and limiting themselves to formal greetings. Maria understands that her appointment is an opportunity not only for herself, but also for those who have long endured prejudice. She decides to start by gathering employee feedback, setting up a hotline where employees can anonymously leave comments about workflows and corporate culture. In the first few days, dozens of messages come in with complaints about Richard's behavior and his tendency toward discrimination. Employees describe him as someone who consistently belittles those who don't fit his narrow definition of the right people. One message recounts how Richard rejected a young intern because, in his words, they looked too bold for the client. Maria realizes his behavior isn't an isolated incident, but a well-established pattern of bias. Maria sets a plan for changes in motion. She prepares for a meeting with senior management to officially announce her appointment. Before this, she decides to give herself a chance to observe Richard's day-to-day behavior firsthand and gather enough grounds to determine his future with the company. On the appointed day, Maria calls Richard to a meeting without revealing the true purpose behind it. Still confident in his position, Richard enters the conference room, barely looking at her, and sits down as if he were an invited expert. His smug smile gives way to slight confusion when he notices Maria's serious expression and the folder of documents on her desk. Maria begins the conversation with a direct question. "Why do you think I am not qualified to work in our company?" Richard is taken aback at first, then smirks, still not realizing what's happening. He responds with a deliberately cold tone, referencing the company's high standards and his personal expectations for candidates, without specifying what exactly he found unsuitable in her. Maria proceeds calmly, opening the folder and pulling out printed excerpts of feedback she's collected through the anonymous hotline. She reads snippets from complaints mentioning Richard's biased attitude toward women and employees of various ethnic backgrounds. Richard's face grows tense as he tries to keep his composure, but his self-confidence begins to crumble. "These comments reflect the views of many employees," Maria says, keeping her gaze fixed on Richard. "And they all describe you." Richard tries to defend himself, stating that high expectations aren't a crime and that he always puts the company's interests first. His voice grows less steady, and he begins to avoid her gaze. At this moment, Maria decides to reveal her true role. "Actually, I wasn't invited here for a regular position," she states, pausing for effect. "I am your new CEO." Richard goes pale. He tries to say something, but the words get stuck in his throat, and he falls silent, realizing the gravity of his misjudgment. Maria continues. "Your behavior is in direct conflict with the values we aim to cultivate in this company. You've been given the chance to be part of a team where every employee is respected, regardless of their background. I expect you to adhere to these new standards if you want to stay here." Richard, realizing he's lost control, agrees. Still in shock, he struggles to process the situation fully, but understands that he cannot afford another mistake. After revealing her role, Maria immediately sets out to implement changes in the company. Her first move is to establish a new zero-tolerance policy on discrimination and bias. She holds meetings with each department, explaining that the company will now encourage openness and inclusivity, and that any form of discrimination will have serious consequences. A new atmosphere starts to permeate the office. Employees who previously feared speaking up now openly share ideas and suggestions. Maria introduces weekly training sessions on anti-discrimination and cross-cultural awareness. During one of these sessions, Richard is required to participate in role-playing exercises that place him in the shoes of the employees he once treated with bias. Feeling the eyes of his colleagues on him, he experiences discomfort, but gradually begins to understand the profound impact his behavior had on the team. A few months into the reforms, the company begins to attract media attention. A journalist, learning about Maria's appointment and the changes in the company, publishes an article about its transformation. The story of how a Black woman took the helm of a company, turning it into a model of inclusivity, quickly gains traction. This draws in new clients, as well as talented professionals who had previously avoided working at the company due to its reputation. For Richard, the consequences are clear. He has become isolated, his colleagues regard him with caution, and his former authority has vanished. Realizing that his behavior is now widely known and that he no longer commands respect within the team, Richard decides to resign. Maria signs his resignation letter without further comment, knowing that his departure marks the final step in cleansing the company. Maria completes the transformation of the company, which becomes a model for others. Her journey, from humiliation at the interview to a complete victory over systemic bias, inspires the employees and stands as a symbol of justice and resilience.